Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So, Tarek and I are doing a series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and we're going to be doing some more Sega Saturn testing this evening on the most recent core, because it has been updated recently, bringing in some nice fixes to the overall Saturnscape on MiSTer FPGA. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different on this test. I'm going to be going through 5 of what I would consider to be the Sega Saturn's best games, and a lot of what I think is the best would also be what you would get if you just googled best Saturn games on the internet. This is just a look to see how the core is holding up on some of those absolute Sega Saturn classics. And right off the top, if there's one Sega Saturn game I play at least once a year, I have it on STV, I have it on Sega Saturn, it's going to be Die Hard Arcade. I think this is one of the best beat-em-ups ever made, whether it's in 2D or 3D, and this just shows what the Sega Saturn could do on the 3D side of things. This is the type of game, when I think Sega Saturn, I think Die Hard Arcade. I have played this thing to death, so it's really easy for me to see how it is doing here. And the best part is, through my entire playthrough of this, I have seen the credits scroll. Everything seems to be working exactly as you would expect, outside of some cracks and pops in the audio still. This is a game that had a lot of graphical glitches back in 2023, but it is definitely shaped up in 2024, and I haven't taken too much of a look at it since. Now playing this on the current core, outside of those little bit of graphical glitches, you'd be hard-pressed to know you weren't playing real Sega Saturn hardware. There might be a few shading issues here and there, but honestly you'd have to look and stare at the screen to find them. It plays exactly as you would expect, it's responsive because it's on FPGA. This is just the Die Hard Arcade you know, love, and remember from back in the day or in your recent testing, and honestly this is what I still think to be one of the best 3D beat-em-ups of all time. So for me to want to take my MiSTer FPGA off the shelf and play Die Hard Arcade on this versus real hardware means it's got to be really good. And I do have my Sega Saturn set up next to me on a 20-inch PVM, so I can play this game on its original hardware whenever I want on a nice television screen. And honestly, what the core is doing here is just a spectacular job. This is Die Hard Arcade the way you remember it, and it is a good test as to how the core is shaping up. Sure, there's still a little bit of audio issue here and there, but honestly, you would barely notice it if I didn't tell you about it. Maybe you wouldn't notice it in the first place. This is just a great game to test as well, because it's using a lot of the different effects that VDP1 and VDP2 can pull off, and it is in full 3D the entire way down the game. And that's the interesting thing, because Sega Saturn had 3D as well as 2D, and it kind of straddled the line between both of those generations. It's a nice thing to see how it's all working here, with the 2D overlay, with the menu, with all of the different character models, all of the different levels. Everything just seems to look correct. This has always been a bright game, and it's coming over so well across HDMI. It's just so much fun to see all the colors pop through. From that water effect there with the dithering, it's just a good looking game, and I think this game is aged really well and gives a great example of what the Sega Saturn could do on the 3D side of things. And as far as what it's doing here in MiSTer FPGA, would I give this game my recommendation to make your next playthrough on the Sega Saturn core versus real hardware? I would. Outside of the little bit of the scratchy audio, this is just an incredible experience from start to finish. It controls well, it sounds good, it plays good, all of the graphics are where they need to be. I do love that John McClane can arrest people, definitely not the point of the game, but this is just a title that on the current core is playing like you would expect it to on real hardware. And again, I didn't know all of the results going into this. All I wanted to do was test some of the Sega Saturn's most popular games, and some of these games I haven't tested in a while, so I was surprised to find the results that I did, both good and bad, and I'll get to those in just a moment. But moving over to another game that is so synonymous with the Sega Saturn, that is Nights into Dreams. If you had a Saturn in the 90s, you had this game if you lived in the US. I was one of the only people among my friend group that had a Saturn, but the other person I knew that had one had this as well. This was just basically the game to have on your Sega Saturn back when you were in the 90s as a kid, and I've definitely played a lot of this. Now you do still get a little bit of the scratchy audio here and there, and you're going to hear it in just a moment. It sounds good, but you can tell it's not quite perfect. But as far as the graphics are concerned, the controls are concerned, the ability for this core to run this game, it is an extremely good experience again across the board. It's responsive, the graphics are where they need to be, the frame rate seems to be mirroring what real hardware would do, and that's what you want to see out of the core, basically feeling like you're playing real hardware even if you're on FPGA. But like I said, the one downside of the core currently, and it's still being worked on and it's not a complaint whatsoever, this is how these things get done, is the audio can still be a little bit cracky and poppy depending on what game you're playing. So go ahead and listen to the soundtrack of Nights into Dreams for 30 seconds and you'll hear a pop here or there. If you're wearing headphones, you should be fine though. Listen and I'll be right back. Now the soundtrack sounds good outside of maybe one pop or whistle there, but you're going to hear in the sound effects of the explosion, you can definitely tell it's clipping the channel out. Now this is on the most recent core, and SRG320 has adjusted a lot of the audio end of the core, but there still seems to be a few issues in a few games, and Nights in a Dream seems to be the most consistent of them. Now that is not in any way, shape, or form a complaint. SRG320 has been doing an incredible job with this core. It just means that a lot of times these things are hard to track down, and it takes multiple revisions to get there. But as far as the boss fight in the first stage, this looks really good. Would I play this over my regular Sega Saturn? Why not? I would just keep the volume down a little bit lower. It looks great, it controls great, it is loading, it's not crashing or freezing whatsoever. This is like 95 to 96% of the way to being a real Sega Saturn piece of hardware when you play Nights into Dreams. This is another game that I've gotten very deep into. I haven't had it crash for a while, and it's just a fun experience. It is definitely one of my favorite games on the Sega Saturn, one that I've been playing since it came out in the 90s, and here today on MiSTer FPGA, it is another game where it is very hard to spot any issues with whatsoever, and that little line of pixels to the left is just some overdraw. Don't worry about that. That's just what happens when you're not on a CRT television sometimes. Now let's move over to Street Fighter 03, and I know what you're thinking, there's already a CPS2 core for this game when we already have it in a perfect form on MiSTer FPGA, and that is 100% true. That does not mean, however, that it's not, again, one of the best Sega Saturn games of all time in my opinion. And the best part is, I've played a lot of 03 in my life. I'm not the best at the game, but I certainly do enjoy it. I had original CPS2 hardware for it. I have a Sega Saturn disc. I've played this game a ton. And I cannot find a single thing that Street Fighter 03 does on MiSTer FPGA that doesn't happen on Sega Saturn. I would say this game is 100% perfect as far as I can tell. Now, if you're a gigantic Street Fighter 03 or Street Fighter Alpha 3 fan and you've played the Sega Saturn version for hundreds and hundreds of hours, you might notice something I don't, so leave me a comment down below if you do. But this being a pure 2D game, drawing all the background layers, all the sprites, all the heads-up display, all those frames of animation, and using the 4MB RAM expansion card, obviously not a physical object here, a setting in the MiSTer FPGA Saturn Core menu. This just plays spectacularly. It's responsive, it's smooth, it's fast, there's no graphical glitches, there's no freezing, there's no any issues with the audio or soundtrack or sound effects whatsoever. You could sit down right now and play Street Fighter 03 on MiSTer FPGA on the current Sega Saturn Core, and you would feel like you were legit just playing real original hardware. This is the game that I point to when people ask, is there any game on the core that just seems 100% perfect? Street Fighter 03 is that game. I've had luck with this for probably since like November of 2023, being extremely good. But now everything just seems to be sheer perfection, including the soundtrack and the sound effects. Go ahead and listen just for 25 seconds so you can hear them, and I'll be back with more perfect Sega Saturn games named Street Fighter 03. But enjoy! Sounds good to me, plays good to me, feels good to me. This is just an amazing experience, and it does go to show just how well the current Sega Saturn MiSTer FPGA Core is doing. I think you could give a controller to pretty much anyone who wasn't a professional tournament player, not show them the hardware they were playing on, and they would have absolutely no idea if they were playing on real Sega Saturn hardware or if they were playing on MiSTer FPGA. The advantage here being that you do get that clear HDMI out, although the Sega Saturn has the best RGB video of any console ever made in my opinion, and you don't need to modify it to get it. You just buy a nice cable and it is ready out the back. But honestly, Street Fighter 03, I could not find a single problem in it whatsoever testing it for this video, so I give it a 10 out of 10 as far as the compatibility is concerned. Well, let's move over to another one of the Sega Saturn's best games. That is going to be Sega Rally. It was between this or Daytona USA, but if you had to ask me, I think Sega Rally is the better of the two. Leave me a comment down below and tell me which one you would pick. And the great part is this is definitely much improved since the last few times we've taken a look at it. This used to have a freezing problem, especially on the 2.5V variants of the RAM, and that seems to be getting better. Just so you know, all of the footage from this test is on a 3.0V RAM stick. I do recommend that you guys try to get off the 2.5Vs if you can. It's like $60 to upgrade, and I'll leave a link in the description below to where you can grab one. It's gonna make your Sega Saturn experience better. But what is here now is working extremely well. It controls like Sega Rally, the graphics are drawing really nicely, but there is again a little bit of audio pop here and there. But it was that this game had no audio for the longest time, especially on the 2.5V RAM sticks, and now pretty much everyone gets the soundtrack across the board. But it is one of those games where something in the sound processing, in the FPGA code, the sound chip, or otherwise is having a little bit of an issue as far as the pop is concerned. It is very minimal, but it is a difference between real original hardware, so something I'll let you listen to in just a moment. But outside of that one audio issue, you can play this game from start to finish. You can see the credits scroll, you can play two-player games, you can have all the fun in Sega Rally that you normally would on real hardware, and again you get amazing visuals out with that HDMI lead out the back. But go ahead and listen to the soundtrack for like 25 seconds or so and tune your ears into any distortion or any pops that you may be able to pick up. I think they'll be pretty obvious, but some of them can be a little bit quiet. Go ahead and listen, I'll be right back with one more game.
One, give it right, baby. Very long, easy left. Check one. Medium left. Medium left, baby. One, medium right.
Now I would say that audio is like 98% of the way there, and if you're not wearing headphones it might be impossible for you to even tell. Now I have editing headphones, I imported them from Japan, they're made by Sony and they were a Japanese exclusive variant. I spend like 8 to 10 hours a day in these headphones and I probably paid an obscene amount for them, but it does allow me to find little minute issues in audio, whether I'm editing for a living or whether I'm making MiSTer FPGA videos. So if you didn't hear it whatsoever, it's probably just because I am surrounded by the audio and I've gotten a little bit used to picking them out. And honestly, that is a good feedback for the Core if you're not wearing professional studio monitors that have that sort of signaling and are attuned to trying to find those problems. You may never know they even exist. And this was just cruel, hitting that checkpoint, sliding in with no gas, and just getting the checkpoint. I almost would have rather run out of time there. But if you want to play Sega Rally today on the current Core, you can do it from start to finish. You should have no issues whatsoever. If you do end up having the audio drop out from underneath you though, it starts to play the soundtrack and then just goes silent, that probably means you've got that 2.5V RAM stick or earlier, and that is going to be what presents the problem. But I finally did run out of time. Now let's move over to Burning Rangers, another game that I would consider one of the Sega Saturn's best games. I think this one may be a tiny bit divisive. I know some people absolutely love it and other people aren't that interested in it. I've loved this game since I first played it. It is in my collection and I play it like once every 2 years. Now I'm going through the FMV sequence first because the last time I did a long-term testing on this game, you kind of had to skip the FMV. It could cause some freezes in the Core. I also haven't scaled this. This is the constraints that it would show up on if you were playing on a real television as well. But now on Burning Rangers and pretty much every single game, the FMV full motion video sequences are going to play like you would expect them to. The days of beating start like it owes you money to get past this are long gone, but there could still be a little bit of stuttering and a little bit of issue in some of the FMV sequences. Now across every single game I tested for this video and every single game I tested for a part 2, and there is a part 2 coming, don't worry, I didn't have any issues at all with the FMV sequences. And if you want to nominate any games for the next 5 best Sega Saturn games of all time, test it on MiSTer FPGA, leave me a comment down below and tell me what they are. But I love the art style of the animated sequence here, and it is just working 100% on the Core. Zero complaints whatsoever. Now unfortunately when we get into the game, I discovered a regression from the previous Core that really does make this something I might not recommend playing versus real hardware. There should be flames showing up very quickly. This is called Burning Rangers, and you're supposed to have flames that you fight. You get this weird pattern effect, some of the sprites on screen showing the flames, but the minute you walk forward they disappear. And the minute I hit export, SRG320 releases a very small core update that brings back the flames in Burning Ranger, so it went from a game that I was saying I don't know if I would play on MiSTer FPGA to a game I can 100% recommend you checking out. That is how fast the core progress happens. I hit export, 2 hours later the flames were back in the core because this was a minor regression. So now if you want to play Burning Rangers on the core, you totally can. There's still a little bit of shading that isn't here that should be, but otherwise this is like 95% of the Burning Rangers you know and love, and now with 100% more flames on the current core. And it's just so much fun to see how quickly these things really do change, because like I said, when I captured this there were no flames in the entire game, and then like 4 hours later the flames were back, and that is awesome. This is one of the Sega Saturn's best games in my opinion, and having it back on MiSTer FPGA with the flames intact is just an awesome thing. It's another game that if you've never played on Sega Saturn, I can't recommend it highly enough. But those are 5 of the best Sega Saturn games of all time tested on the current core. I'll be doing new tests as well when cores come out. I'll be testing the games they improve, but if you want to see more episodes like this, testing the hits, leave me a comment down below. Maybe next video I can test 5 shmups or 5 fighting games. I'm kind of trying to diversify it to make it a little bit more fun for you and me, so if you have any ideas, leave them down below. But go play some Sega Saturn games because they're getting really good. See you next time. Bye bye.